Today's episode is brought to you by Alexandra Park BJJ. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is a full-contact martial art and combat sport that was developed in Brazil in the 20th century. With roots in Judo and Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, has been developed and refined into a unique grappling art with the aim to allow a smaller and weaker individual to beat a bigger and stronger opponent with the application of proper technique. Based in Muswell Hill, North London, Alexandra Park BJJ's classes are designed so that you can develop your fitness levels, balance, coordination, and flexibility in a no-pressure environment, and to provide the opportunity to start a new sport at a reasonable price. At Alexandra Park BJJ, we aim to be inclusive so that everyone can benefit from this incredible art, not just the athletic or ultra-competitive. To book your free class, head over to alexandraparkbjj.co.uk or email inquiries at alexandraparkbjj.co.uk.
Welcome to Audiobookish, an audiobook review and discussion podcast looking at audiobooks both big and small, as well as radio plays, narrative podcasts, anything audiobook-ish. This podcast may contain spoilers, rants, curse words, mispronunciations of names and places, and more.
Hello everyone, you're listening to Audiobookish. My name's Fahad Rahman and I'm, as always, joined by Poppy Knight.
Hello.
And today we're doing a special episode on the British Audio Awards. This is a new awards kind of celebrating everything about audio storytelling and audiobooks, and we're going to be reviewing the books on the Best Audiobook Non-fiction Memoir shortlist. So that'd be Careless People by Sarah Wynn-Williams, I'll Never Call Him Dad Again by Darian, I Love You, Byeee by Adam Buxton, Patriot by Alexei Navalny, Still Beautiful by Katie Piper, and The Lives of Lee Miller by Anthony Penrose. Okay, so we're going to be talking about the books in the order in which they're kind of listed on the shortlist. Poppy, would you mind reading out the intro for Careless People?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Sarah Wynn-Williams, a young diplomat from New Zealand, pitched for her dream job. She saw Facebook's potential and knew it could change the world for the better. But when she got there and rose to its top ranks, things turned out a little different. From wild schemes cooked up on private jets to risking prison abroad, Careless People exposes both the personal and political fallout when boundless power and a rotten culture take hold. In a gripping and often absurd narrative, Wynn-Williams rubs shoulders with Mark Zuckerberg, Sheryl Sandberg, and world leaders, revealing what really goes on among the global elite, and the consequences this has for all of us.
Okay, so this book is kind of quite fresh in my mind. I only just finished listening to it a couple of hours ago. One of the things it brings to mind is a lot of these political satires that you see, kind of like, for example, In the Thick of It. She's got a great way of writing with a lot of humour about subjects that's got kind of a lot of serious real-world consequences. How did you feel kind of about the book? Did you kind of get like a similar sort of vibe about it in terms of like the way the humour came across?
It's interesting because not necessarily. I think I heard it in a much more serious tone for most of the time, but a really well-written, very engaging, very narrative-driven kind of book. That I thought it was really engaging, not necessarily in a humour satire way as such, but perhaps maybe just because I was taking so much about how the serious topics of it, like I say, these big real-world consequences and political fallout and things. But yeah, it was absolutely enveloped by the writing and the story, absolutely. She's
a brilliant communicator. I mean, the reason why I say that is kind of a lot of the scenarios that she encounters are like, they're really farcical. It's kind of like there's no adults. There's no adults in the room. No one really knows what they're doing. There's also kind of quite a lot of cringe-inducing moments, especially with, Mark Zuckerberg's kind of social awkwardness around certain scenarios. It did kind of remind me a little bit about Armando Mucci's TV shows like Veep and In the Thick of It, where you've got these really powerful people where you expect them to behave professionally and to kind of know what they're doing, and they just end up putting themselves in situations they don't need to be put in. And I think that is kind of the underlining theme of the book. I think it might, kind of paraphrasing what she says at the end of the book, it doesn't need to be this way, or didn't need to be this way. The other thing I kind of found fascinating about it is, like, she's obviously a very driven and passionate person. And a while back, the way me and Poppy really kind of connected was that we was both in a Facebook group where for aspiring publishers, and Sarah kind of has that sort of like energy where she's like she wants to do this thing, and kind of like she's taking all these extra steps to do it. I kind of like fell away from that, but you're still working in publishing, so just wondering like her initial attitude of wanting to work for this particular company, whether that kind of like chimed in with like your experience of like pursuing a career in publishing, if that's
I get what you mean. And I think certainly the drive to really want that, I think maybe I don't feel as brave as she was to pitch the job that she wanted. So basically you have in this book, it is very much her memoir, and we do get kind of personal stuff from her childhood and sort of how that's fed to her work ethic, her outlook on life and stuff like that. And basically, she used Facebook just as a user while she was working as a diplomat, and saw, as that blurb says, the potential it had to do good. It was really helpful, the kind of marked safe. I don't think it actually was marked safe at that point, but being able to get in touch with her family when there was a natural disaster back home, and things like that. And she really saw how it could do good. Like, I guess I'd sort of not made that connection, but we only met through Facebook, and that's led to this, and that's really great. It has so much power to do good things. But then, the subtitle of this book, you've got Careless People, a story of where I used to work, power, greed, madness. It's that thing that I don't think this is a surprise or a spoiler to anyone, but basically how the fact that all these people cared about was growth at the cost of people's lives, integrity, all sorts of things, is the story of this. And how sort of she pitched this job because she wanted to make a difference. She could see how politically it could make a positive impact, and she ended up then involved in how politically it had a very harmful impact. Sorry, I've gone a little bit away from the story there, but I really definitely admired her determination of, this is the job I want, this is something where I feel like I can lend my talents to make something of it. Absolutely. But in awe of her then determination to keep pitching this job that they didn't want her to have. But also I fully understood kind of then when she was in this environment, it was both her dream job that she'd sacrificed a lot for, had worked so hard for, wanted so much, but the actual job was awful. The management was awful, the situation was awful, but as well as things like working in America and needing a job for healthcare and being a big deal in there, it's also kind of, I got that it was difficult for her to get out, even when it was that terrible, because this is what she'd wanted, and it's, I think, difficult to let go of that dream.
Yeah, so I mean, you kind of mentioned this book has got a really kind of great opening. It kind of starts with her recounting a story of how she was bitten by a shark and, quite frankly, negligent parenting that she received, how she nearly died. And one of the key sentences she says is that, a doctor says, talking about how her parents saved her and stuff, and no, I saved myself. And that kind of like self-reliance, that kind of like that drive to kind of maybe not seek help, or being reluctant to seek help, also kind of is gone through the book. There are several situations where she kind of encounters sexual harassment, where the management of Facebook are ignoring really dangerous warning signs, especially in the situation in Myanmar, the way they kind of ignore her advice about how to diplomatically handle certain situations. And you do kind of wonder whether or not, if she'd kind of blown the whistle slightly sooner, whether not just Facebook but the world might have been kind of like a different place.
It's interesting though, because like how much has changed since this is the thing that I guess worries me. This is as a warning to listeners, this is a very heavy shortlist. A lot of the books are really deep, heavy stuff. And like, I think it's extremely important that these things have come out, and that she has done that, and hopefully it's changed things. But also, it was a little bit of like, have they been stopped at all? Like, is the way it's functioning now any different to the time which she's talking about when she was working there? Which is a worrying thing. But there was an interesting quote kind of related to that when she was talking about her boss Cheryl writing a book, and they were sort of asking, why did she write a book? And it was like, a book is the best way to start a conversation. And it was funny because I'd literally kind of like a few minutes before that, as I was listening, been thinking, I wonder why she wrote this as a book rather than just leaking it to news outlets. And so therefore I thought it was quite funny that a few minutes later, that was sort of the rationale was given to me in a different thing, but through the book, that the very fair point that yes, a book does start a conversation, because then you also do still get the news coverage as these stories from it are pulled out and things like that. But yeah, tricky one.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I was doing a little bit of reading just after finishing the book, and the book was kind of written in secrecy. She's got a really stringent kind of like gag order put on her not to discuss things that happen. So she's kind of facing bankruptcy as a result of kind of maybe breaching that agreement.
I was so grateful to her for doing that. Like, these things absolutely do need to be exposed. I certainly remember when the book came out, hearing the bit about serving beauty ads to teens after they delete selfies, and it just made me feel sick. Actually, and it's funny because that was the thing that really stuck out to me at the time of hearing about it, and yet it's actually such a small bit of the book. There's so many other things that are going on in it, and so many more scandals and things. And yeah, absolutely, the bravery to come out with it, especially as you say, under those circumstances. It was not only written in secret but recorded in secret for this audiobook as well. But so grateful. And again, that's a theme in this shortlist is people doing incredibly brave things selflessly, really, to try and improve things for the rest of the world.
Yeah, I mean, and there are kind of like a lot of incidents that are covered in the book, from her being sexually harassed, really weird kind of like, and not just by men, she's sexually harassed by her female. That was, I mean, basically she does like a lot of trips on these private jets, and her female boss basically invited her to get into bed on like the jet plane. And I just thought that's weird, right? That's kind of like not acceptable at all, and just kind of like being stuck in this position. Kind of like, how do you escalate a complaint around that when no one's listening? No one's listening. Yeah,
absolutely. They tell you not to tell anyone that and stuff. Absolutely. No, I'm fully with you. Yeah. Also, just going back a little bit to you saying about sort of looking at it based off of her and her career, something I found really interesting was in sort of the early days, so less of, how terrible it's been, but more her forging this position at Facebook, this diplomatic position, is that she fails a lot. Meetings go horribly wrong, and things don't get achieved. And I think it's so easy for us to be perfectionists and to feel that like every slight failure means your career's over. And I certainly am guilty of doing that. And so it was really quite nice to hear those experiences and actually just the fighting through it. And she didn't even really dwell so much on those failures. I mean, I'm sure they affected her, but it was that fight to on to the next kind of thing. That was, it's really good to hear, because when you think you have to do everything right and be perfect all the time, it's nice to hear actually you're probably going to fail before you get it right.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of pick up, if any single one of these incidents had happened to me, I would be digging a hole to kind of hide myself in for a very, very long period of time. So her kind of like her perseverance, her kind of strength of character, and the way because she's got this perseverance, this obvious strength of character, obvious intelligence, it's even more frightening kind of like how long it took for her to kind of like maybe make the right decision to kind of leave an obviously poisonous situation. So I thought that was kind of quite interesting as well.
And on that poisonous thing as well, like I think one of the things I understand, so the title Careless People, and it has the epigraph as a quote from Great Gatsby at the start of it, and I do understand that reference, but I do think it needs to be acknowledged that like carelessness is not an appropriate word for what they're doing. It's so intentionally malicious and such a flagrant disregard, not not because it's just done without care. It's calculated, and their calculation comes up at a number that is abhorrent. So yeah, I do think that's an interesting one. I do get the parallels with the reference, but it's one I felt a bit uncomfortable with. I don't know, did you think a similar thing while you were listening?
I mean, I think carelessness can kind of like take lots of different forms. I don't think like the carelessness is what she's talking about is like people being like reckless. It's just people not giving a shit about things they probably should give a shit about. So yeah, I think this book, just to recap, I think it's a really strong candidate. I think her narration, we haven't talked about her narration. Her narration is fabulous.
Yeah.
The prose is also excellent, and the story itself is fascinating. I hate using this word because it's overused in literary context. It's urgent. And it's, if you're kind of interested in books about kind of corporate, the way a corporation grows and politics or anything like any one of those two areas, this is kind of a fascinating book to pick up. So I think it's a really strong candidate.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's absolutely fascinating and really well performed. I've very much enjoyed listening to it. A very quick thing, something that I just feel like I have to mention. It's very off topic, but she does in one bit. She's talking about this bit very serious of how her husband was quite scared for her when she was traveling a lot for work into places where she would be in danger, and kind of understandably he's nervous. And then she goes, he'd be nervous anyway, but he'd maybe be less nervous if it weren't for the baby. And like, it was very much, it flashed up the Hunger Games scene in my mind, that I couldn't quite believe she did that narrative, narrative, if it weren't for the baby, mic drop. So that was funny. But yes, as a book, it is an extremely serious book and an extremely good book, and absolutely fascinating. It is heavy stuff, but you are taken through it in a really conscientious way. It's really gripping and important that we realise this sort of stuff that's going on, that decision makers are making these decisions across the world that are directly harmful for their own greed. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So the next one we'll be discussing is I'll Never Call Him Dad Again by Caroline Darian. It's narrated by Caroline Darian and Heather Long. I'll quickly read out the synopsis for that. So in November 2020, Caroline Darian received a call from the police in Carpentras. Her father was in police custody. The seizure of his computer equipment revealed the unthinkable. Since 2013, he had drugged his wife before handing her over in a state of unconsciousness to men from all ages and stages of life. With exceptional courage, Darian recounts the earth-shattering discovery that a loved one, her own father, is capable of the worst. But more importantly, she shares the remarkable story of her mother, Giselle, and how she carried on living without self-pity while learning to manage all of the things her husband once took care of. She shares how her mother managed to maintain her joie de vivre in circumstances none of us could imagine. Together, mother and daughter reveal another side to the violence committed against women as they bravely transform their private trauma into a collective fight. So this is a really heavy story. So it's this for those of you who aren't aware, there was a case in France where Giselle was drugged and raped by a husband who invited strangers into their home, and he videotaped this over several years as well. This took me, I think, maybe 2 weeks to get through because I just had to stop listening to it and take a break. You listen to the story of what happened. You've got, all right, that's probably going to be the worst thing that happens in this book, in this narration, and then something else turns up. It's like, okay, that's going to be the worst thing. Then something else happens, and then you think, okay, that's going to be the worst thing. And like the horrible things that this family kind of discovers and goes through is, I mean, it's horrific. Did you know much about the story beforehand, and kind of how did you kind of prepare yourself to kind of listen to it?
Yeah, so I didn't know the story beforehand. I'd seen, the name in the protectively, selfishly, however you want to put it, I
Yeah.
hadn't engaged with it. So I really didn't know anything at all, which then made, as you say, all the more reveals as they keep going on were kind of, very much revealed new to me as I went in that sort of narrative way. And I mean, that it reflects the experience that the family had to go through, as suddenly there's something worse, and then there's something more worse, and there's something more worse coming along. Yeah, it was a really difficult listen, but also actually wasn't one I wanted to shy away from.
Yeah.
And not in any way meaning any judgment on that. It was more, I found it interesting that I wasn't as put off listening as I would have expected I would be.
Yeah.
And a lot of that, to be fair, is said for the way it's written and I guess translated as well.
Yeah.
As well as narrated.
It's in no way kind of like salacious or
No.
gratuitous.
God, no.
Yeah. It's kind of like, it's not that sort of book at all. Yeah.
No, but it's deeply personal. And I think in a similar way, like I said, I didn't engage with the news stories around it, but I am very glad that I am now informed on the issue. And I think for me personally, I prefer being informed on the issues through a more narrative and more personal sense than through the news. And obviously I fully understand there's perspective and bias and things that can come in with that. But yeah, I think it's something interesting across this shortlist, really, that I'm really grateful to be learning a lot.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily making me turn to the news, but it's maybe making me want to seek out more books about things. So yeah, and I think as well, so yeah, with saying there how, it's well written, well translated, well narrated. Heather Long is a narrator that we work with quite a lot at my old job, and she's fantastic, and is really, really good in this. Something I think is interesting, though, because I wonder how I'll feel, sitting for a number of hours with this book, how I'll feel listening to other books that she's narrated. Am I gonna be taken back to that? And is that something that, I'm sure it's something the narrators think about, but I wonder how much, and I'm sure it depends narrator by narrator, but having your voice associated with something like this, Yeah. But it is a fantastic narration. But it is also nice to hear Carolyn's voice as well,
Yes.
kind of at the beginning of the end, to have that personal connection as well on bits of it and hear that real person, part of it, a reminder that this is a real person,
Yes.
that this actually happened to. This isn't a story as, engagingly, narratively it's written. These are real things.
Yeah. I think it's also kind of quite interesting because in the UK at the moment, there is, for the past kind of like couple of years, there's been kind of big debates about how authorities and society at large deals with sexual abuse, all the way from initial investigations and prosecutions to prison terms, and also the way we, society in large, need to kind of like work to find a way to prevent these things from happening. And I think you can kind of separate the themes in the book into kind of like maybe two major things. The way what her father did completely crushed, her sense of self, and how she is trying to salvage something in terms of making sure, or trying to build a world that this sort of thing can't ever happen again. And I think that those two separate things kind of like come across quite strongly through that book. I think for me, the most crushing bit in the book was her discovering that she might have been, and it's never quite clear because she's not sure herself, she might have been also a victim of her father's behaviour, and the way that her mother kind of like responds to that, I felt was like one of the most crushing sequences in the book. Like, obviously her mother is suffering and she needs to deal with her suffering the way that's best, but the sense of betrayal that Caroline feels about her mother maybe not believing that her father could do that to one of his own children, and her mother not necessarily being there for her in the way that she would have wanted or kind of like needed as well. I was just wondering, like, for you, was that a similarly devastating moment? Was there other kind of moments that might have stood out?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot I want to talk about from that. But yeah, that bit especially, it was quite telling. So this edition of the book, in France, she's written 2 books.
Yes.
And this brings the 2 of them together. And I think that was a really good editorial decision, I think, to combine the 2. But it is interesting where you have that break, because then you had like the the trial, or at least the majority of the trial, kind of
Yeah.
in that gap. And it is telling how she switches to more often using her mother's name rather than calling
Yes.
her mother,
Yeah.
because you can really tell how that has affected the relationship. And yeah, it's a tricky one, because her mother wants to live in denial, but also you need to acknowledge, because I mean, regardless of whether or not she were raped, she was a victim. I
Yes.
think is proven, because there are images of her clearly unconscious, not in the clothing that she had ever worn, underwear that was not hers. So she clearly has been a victim in some sense. And yeah, this is a big thing I wanted to bring up, because the book certainly told me, and I'm sure it's told a lot of other people, about chemical submission, not really knowing about that at all. I'm aware of people, getting spiked on nights out, but not aware of it as a more...
It's a tool for domestic abuse, really, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, exactly. That basically giving medication and drugs that render someone unconscious, and then anything could happen, and then this person genuinely does not know that has happened to them, which is terrifying. And yeah, it was definitely devastating hearing her story about it, of the fact that she is never going to know what has happened to her.
Yes.
And that is horrible. And especially, I think we've spoken a lot before how, for me, memories are really important, and very much an identity thing. And that, I think, is horrible, that she's always going to have that uncertainty, and that as well, with the not knowing, it makes reporting these things so much more difficult. The fact that if he hadn't been caught upskirting,
I mean, fucking hell,
none
dude.
of this
Like,
would have, in none of this would have been uncovered, is just horrific, because it tells you how much is that happening anyway, and that people don't know. As well, the real medical effects, not only of obviously having all these drugs put inside you, but the medical effects of the rapes that you're not aware of. So you're not aware of the risks, the kind of sexually transmitted diseases, or all sorts of things where your body is in more harm. And so a big bit of the book that I think is really important is the kind of championing for people in the medical profession to be more aware of the signs. The memory loss she was having, the OBGYN kind of symptoms that she was having, that these were signs. I was sort of, especially, like I say, I was discovering things as I was going through it, and it was kind of like, oh, well, how on earth would they have known? And they didn't know, and I know obviously she beats herself up about there were these signs, but you can't know to read those signs without that knowledge. Yeah,
would imagine this would even be like possible. I mean, I don't even say the guy's name, but one of the most depraved things I've ever heard this guy's doing. And you kind of mentioned he might have been able to be, he's only caught due to the upskirting. There is a strong implication in the book that he might be responsible for murders. Yeah. And then, yes, I mean, the police, if they'd done a better job of like conducting their investigation, he might have been stopped much sooner. And then, there's a bit in the book where he does a certain pattern of behavior around these murders, and then that seems to stop. And then, he starts drugging and assaulting his wife. But there is also a strong implication in the book that there must be lots of other victims out there that he's done this to as well. And, the point that you were making around training of not just medical staff to maybe suspect these things are happening, but also around the police force and the way victims are handled. I think one of the strongest things she mentions in the book is about kind of victim and survivor care, about how there needs to be a lot more resources put into providing people with psychological and providing for the psychological healthcare needs afterwards is something that and obviously the defence system's different to the UK system, but I think that's probably true for here as well. So it's kind of thinking about how what lessons we can take from this situation and maybe transplant here.
I'm sure there's certainly ways to improve. And it was an interesting one because I really felt during, and maybe again it was the split between the two books, or maybe it wasn't quite so much, but the beginning bit, although obviously this has gone undetected for so long, but that was sort of almost more the nature of the crime. You can't really blame the law enforcement for that necessarily. And it gave me, I think, the way that they, as soon as they did find something, the the determination of these officers to find more and to prosecute and things was great, and kind of gave me a lot of faith in that system. But then later on, you have a lot less faith in that system. Like you said, the evidence in the murder trials being just completely just lost, and everything, and the verdict as well. I think, like I said, because I'd not been up on it, I'd thought it was maybe it had been a better outcome than actually it was.
I had the impression of that as well.
Yeah, and also while I was listening, I think France has, like, just in the last few weeks or something, changed its definition of rape for legal cases. So that is great that things are moving forward, but I think that had given me a false sense that, this is, revolutionized everything, and it's absolutely changed a lot, and I think it's improved a lot, but it's by no means perfect. So yeah, it was an odd one because it started by giving me faith in, yes, it's going to be hard to detect, but these people are going to try and help, to then you just can't trust the system. When this was a big thing in this, is not only you can't trust the system, but it makes you not trust anyone ever.
I mean,
it very much did give me that sort of feeling. And I think as well, so going on to, as you say, there's those two parts. So there's that part of it, and then there's her personal part as how it's shook her worldview completely and things. And I think it's interesting because it's obviously very different, but has some similarities, experience to children that grow up with an abusive parent, because you still have the similarity of, like, grieving that parent you wish you had, and that you should have had but you never had. That is absolutely grief, and I think a very similar grief, but it's obviously very different when you think you had that, to lose it. That was who she thought she had. I mean, she had issues with her father, but she thought she loved the man that she thought he was, and then to suddenly find out that's not who he is absolutely devastating. And I think that's the big thing from this, again, with being a very personal story, to see that, and I'm sure that will resonate with a lot of people.
So for this particular book, I think we could talk for an hour about this. This and Careless People do deserve maybe longer dives into, but I'm just being kind of wary about the time. Again, you mentioned Heather Long's narration. I felt the narration was exceptional. Really, this can't have been an easy text to handle. She deals with it with a great deal of sensitivity and emotion, and again, a really strong contender on the shortlist as well. So let's move on to I Love You, Byeee by Adam Buxton. This is narrated by Adam Buxton. Okay, so in I Love You, Byeee, Adam recounts with hilarious and heartwarming candour about the highs and lows of working with Joe Cornish and revolutionising the worlds of DIY TV and podcasting in the process. He writes about crazy times hanging out with notorious rock and roll hellraisers like Travis and Radiohead, the challenges of parenting, losing his mother, and a drug hell that led him to nearly dying in the arms of a comedy legend. There are also bits about him arguing with his wife, getting instructions on edginess from Louis Theroux, going on the Bake Off, and much, much more that you didn't ask about but definitely needed. Okay, so Adam is a really strong narrator. He's got because he's reading out his own words, he's got a great sense of timing on the jokes. He really knows the jokes and the humour and the comedy in this. I'm not his biggest fan. I know, like, lots of people really, really love Adam Buxton. Just wondering what your kind of like feelings on him were. Yeah, so it's not really been someone that's been massively on my radar. I certainly recognised his face and stuff, but haven't watched a lot of his things and not listened to his podcasts and stuff. And I think it definitely brings a lot of humour to the book. I don't think it's necessarily converted me into a big fan. I think for me, I think my brothers and my mates are kind of much bigger fans of like the Adam and Joe show. I never really got into that, so like for me, I didn't really have a strong personal connection. And I think I don't want to kind of like compare it to the other two books that we've discussed already. I didn't really feel like he did anything to engender a stronger connection like that. I mean, I really cared about what happened in Caroline and Sarah's stories, and with Adam, while there's kind of like a lot of similarities in terms of the things that he went through, especially kind of like there's a quite long sequence in the book where he kind of talks about his mother passing away and kind of having to go through all these old photographs and clearing out the house and stuff like that, which is something that I've had to do over the past few years when my when my mother passed away. And he also kind of like talks about parenting a lot as well. I feel like this is a book mainly for Adam Buxton fans. I don't know if you're not an Adam Buxton fan, whether you'd maybe get as much out of it. I don't know if that kind of like chimes in with what you feel as well or not.
I think that's fair enough. I'd certainly never tell you not to read it. I really enjoyed listening, and I did take some stuff out of it, but yes, I probably wouldn't seek it out. But yeah, it's certainly not a waste of your time if you're not already a fan. More for fans. Yeah,
I mean, and it's tonally, it's very different to the previous two books. This is out and out trying to hit you with laughs. And I also felt there are kind of quite a lot of good audio production things that happen in the book in terms of like the jingles that he uses. And the way that, you know, we was previously talking about Terry Pratchett books and how do you do like the little the star kind of like
the
note
footnotes,
thing, footnotes in that. And I feel the way that he did the footnotes in this was really, really good. You can kind of get you kind of like these like jingles, and the side comes in, kind of like him putting like an extra little bit of stuff in there. I think the music in the book was really good. He also uses audio inserts from like jingles and TV clips in there as well. And this audiobook also includes a kind of a podcast, basically a podcast episode at the end where he's kind of talking to Joe Cornish. So there is a lot of content in the book as well.
Yeah, so just again, a lot that I was wanting to talk about that you've mentioned there. Yeah. So kind of the beginning bit in that, it's interesting it being in this shortlist because it is a very different kind of book, and in a kind of way where, certainly emotional impact wise, you can't really compare. And I felt I was more comparing it to previous shortlists we've done that were kind of like quite heavy on celebrity memoirs, especially post COVID, when like a lot of comedians couldn't work, so they were all writing their books, and then they all ended up on the shortlist. Yeah. So I think you've very much got to think of it in a similar vein to those ones. And then, about the jingles and the music and stuff like that, I think that's really nice and a really good addition to the audio, that you can get those kinds of things. And they were fun. Some of them were original, as in like, putting the original thing onto the audio, and some of them were original in the sense of they were made for the audio. So that was really nice. On the bonus content stuff, I think the interview at the end was really nice. I think that was kind of nice bonus content that, you wouldn't necessarily transcribe and put into the print book, but it was nice to have, as you say, kind of like a podcast thing, but also nice that, it's not just their podcast because they're specifically talking about the book. They talk about passages from it and things like that. So that is, I kind of like that as bonus content. One thing I'm not overly sure on is because some of the other bonus content, especially like some moments where he was like, oh, I didn't actually put this in the book, but I'm going to say it here for the audio listeners, and the kind of hours of bonus content, like there seems to be a lot of bonus. To me, it felt a little bit like, I don't love that too much, because something I love about the audio format is that it's accessible. The part of its function is to give people who can't access the print version for whatever reason a way to access. But that also goes both ways. I don't like the idea that too much content is then exclusive to the audio, that those who can't access the audio then miss out on content. And I kind of feel a little bit with those sorts of choices, either it was important enough that you should have written it into the book or got it re-edited in, or it wasn't important enough and it didn't need to be in the audio, is kind of how I feel. So like, I think the interview was great, but there's some other things where I think that's just sort of slapping bonus content on there, kind of like just to try and sell more, maybe to try and get both. It just felt a little bit like, for me, that wouldn't be my choice. And I guess my main point I wanted to make on that is that I don't want it, it's great that we're having these awards that are recognizing audio, but there's also a real responsibility with that and for the judges as to what are they going to award. And I don't want the new standard of best audio to be most exclusive content, because that's not what makes the best audio. There's a lot to love about this book. I don't want it to seem too disparaging, but I did think that was an important point.
I mean, it's a really funny book. And as someone who's a similar age to Adam, there are kind of like, there's a lot of like nostalgia, funny bits, kind of looking, think about like VHSs and all that sort of thing. Just to kind of pick up kind of one more point you was making about the audio. Out of all the books on the shortlist, I think this is the one book that probably does make most of the audio format in terms of the production choices. So like when Adam is narrating, he kind of like, he uses like several different voices. So there's kind of bits where he's kind of like rambling outside and you can hear kind of like an outside noise where he's kind of like walking through a field or something. There's more professionally recorded bits where he's clearly in his studio as well, and then you've got other bits where he's kind of like doing the asides and alongside the jingles and stuff like that. So production wise, it was the most interesting book on the shortlist, which I do feel kind of like also added to the listenability. Is that a word? With the other books on the shortlist, it didn't kind of really have that variety where this one definitely did. And again, kind of Adam he's got a very listenable. I need to stop making up words. He's got a very nice voice to listen to. In terms of the story and the way that he told it, was there any kind of emotional high points, low points that you wanted to, that kind of hooked you in at all?
There absolutely were, and I think the same thing as you were saying about grieving for his mother and stuff like that was definitely very emotional. I did feel like there was some real emotional whiplashes. You kind of had those deep moments, and then suddenly there was a jaunty little sting into a new chapter, and that felt a little bit. Yeah,
but that's just typical bloke behaviour, though, isn't it?
Sure,
can't wallow in like sincere, genuine, proper emotions without trying to kind of undercut it.
Perhaps.
For
Well, it sort of felt a bit like, because I think in a physical book, you reach the end of the chapter, there's some blank space at the bottom of the page, you sort of can take a breath, you turn the page over, start of a new chapter.
Yeah.
It is a different experience and something that I think, as things are being released in both formats more, that hopefully people and kind of editors will think about more as well, because that is a very different experience. You kind of have a full stop and a restart versus really poignant end of chapter and then a new chapter, dancey, singy, musical sting. Is just, I'm not saying it's necessarily wrong, but it is something that's interesting, that differs on the format, definitely. But it did have some very deep, genuine emotional moments. It had some very funny moments. Again, sort of with you saying about kind of career-wise, talking about him forging a career in the creative industries as well was really quite interesting as to how he did that, sort of almost like how people, with the DIY TV stuff, how people made a name for themselves as content creators through YouTube, but him doing that kind of the step before with kind of home tapes and stuff was all really interesting.
And kind of the other thing that kind of stuck with me in the book was like the personal and kind of professional rivalry he had with like Joe Cornish, and how I always find it kind of quite interesting to read about how personal and professional relationships can kind of bleed into each other and kind of like poison one well and stuff like that. So I found that stuff, and he's kind of quite candid about like his jealousy and envy and kind of his part in the quarrels that they had, and he's kind of quite remorseful.
Yeah, it shows real emotional growth.
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah.
I think, again, it's kind of quite a very strong candidate on the shortlist. I can absolutely see why it's there. It didn't maybe connect with me the same way that Careless People and I'll Never Call Him Dad again did. It's tonally like, it's completely different to anything else on the shortlist. So I think the judges are going to have a really like difficult time separating those for three particular books. Okay, so those are the first three books on the shortlist. We're going to release another episode where we talk about the second three books on the shortlist, which will be Patriot by Alexei Navalny, Still Beautiful by Katie Piper, and The Lives of Lee Miller by Anthony Penrose. Till then, guys, thanks. Bye.
Bye.